This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy. Hey, Tiffany. Welcome back.
Hi,
Welcome
Bobby.
back to the show, our show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our show.
How are you, my friend?
Wow, what was that look? You look shocked. You said, hey, Bobby. And then you looked. It's like, oh, my God, it's really Bobby. Your eyes widened. Like,
Well,
were you expecting somebody else named Bobby?
Because I talked over you and I'm doing it again. So I was like, oh, Tiff, come on. Wait your turn.
Nah, but you were looking down. You were doing the show notes. You didn't realize you were talking over me. That was an accidental voiceover.
I know. And I've got you on a different screen view. So it's all, it's all different. Like change is good as a holiday.
Wait, hold on. How do I look? Let me just.
You look fabulous. I've got you really big front and center. Instead of the gallery view, I've got you on the speaker view. You're like, boom.
Wow. Speaker view.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah. It's important.
How big is the screen? Do you have like one of those mega screens now?
I've got a pretty big screen.
That Melissa was wanting?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Hers just like screen envy.
Yeah. I don't know how, if I get back onto my laptop now, I don't know how I ever used it. You know, when you get used to a big screen and then you look at this, it's like, it's like trying to do your work on a phone. I'm like, how did I ever use this?
Oh, phone is horrible. I can't, like, people just sit there like hunched over. That's no way to live. Just typing with two thumbs, just going mental on that little mobile phone. I can't do that. I think I'm too old for that. But I do like working on a portable laptop. My screen's 16 inches, so it's not terribly small for a laptop, but it's great. It's extremely comfortable. But you know what? Doing things like this and doing meetings, I would love to get. I think I'm going to invest in a giant screen. Amy has one. It's just like this big screen, and she does her meetings. It's almost like you're sitting in front of the actual person.
Yeah, you could just pinch hers. You just like do the old sneakeroo.
Nah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. She's too quick for me. She'll be on to me in a minute. She has defense mechanisms and booby traps set up in the event that I try to nick her screen. It can be quite dangerous. So, yeah, what's going on?
Well, I thought you talking about Amy kicking your ass over a screen is a great segue to talk about love.
Is it? Are we talking about love? Is that what we're talking about?
Let's talk about love.
Oh, speaking of Amy's screen, so really bad experience involving the screen. So one of my former co-authors, I guess a co-author is a co-author forever. It's not like, unless you take their name off the book, something happens. But one of my friends and co-authors lost his wife recently, and we attended the funeral virtually on Amy's big screen. That was not a pleasant experience. I try to explain, because when someone passes, most people usually say lovely things about them. Like, you very rarely hear, well, so-and-so passed. Oh, thank heavens, I couldn't stand that person. What a miserable human being. You just don't say that. You say these lovely things. And I feel that's not enough, because every once in a while you come across people, they're just on a different wavelength. When you meet them, you're like, okay, this person is different. Hannah was one of those people. I was trying to explain this the other day on Craig Harper's podcast. And, this isn't going to mean anything to most of our listeners, but we all have a mutual friend who works in hospice care. And she's a nurse, and she is one of the most amazingly kind, angelic, ethereal people. Almost seems otherworldly, our friend Nikki. And Hannah was kind of in that realm. And she battled cancer for 13 years, went into a state of complete remission. So there was this hope. But as he explained it, there was always this feeling of death hanging over them, in between them, because they just knew there was a possibility that the cancer could come back, and it did. And there's a lot to that that'll just leave off of this. And she lost her battle with cancer on the 19th of May. And I found out about it first thing in the morning when I woke up at about 5 a.m. because the UK is quite a few hours ahead, 8 hours ahead of me to be exact. And it was, I think I respond to death in abject denial. Like, oh no, wow, that's horrible. And then I don't feel anything, feel absolutely nothing when this person who is, the only way I could describe her, she was kind of like my mother. When she passed, I was in complete denial for about almost a day. And then the next day I was shattered by this loss. And, with Hannah, it took me a couple of hours, and I just sat with that, like, what an absolute loss. I really liked this person. I don't know how else to explain it. I liked them, and I saw something quite different in them. She was just kind, extraordinarily courageous, vulnerable, human, cheeky, very cheeky and mischievous, which are two attributes I deeply appreciate in people. And they were just talking about her, and it was a heartbreaking funeral, but quite English, to where they're telling stories that if she was sitting there, she would be beside herself at the humiliation, the most humiliating, embarrassing stories from her childhood. Her dad was up there, and her dad, turns out that he was caring for his wife for 11 years who had dementia. So poor dad. And he's trying to be in the beginning of the funeral, there was something where before it started and he was on video, and I didn't know that was her dad. And he's pumping his fist in the air to people, and and I'm thinking, like, well, what's this all about? And then he was introduced as her dad. I was like, oh, I get this. He's trying to keep himself together for his little girl. So he was hilarious and just, hanging shit on her, which is very stereotypical. But then there were times where he would almost completely lose composure, and you just saw that pain. And he was going over these rules and principles for life. Like, what makes a person like Hannah? What is it that packs a funeral home? And then you have people from all over the world attending that funeral, literally, because of what this person meant to them. What creates someone like that? And one of the things that Pete was talking about is Hannah had this thing where she would just let go of stuff. She wouldn't hang on to things. And that level of forgiveness and that level of non-attachment lent itself to her being more fully engaged in life, even in the face of death and the people in her life while she was on earth living it. And I think that is so beautiful. And there was, I was thinking about the Bible. I was thinking about Bible study during that funeral. And I'm not a religious person, but I love stories. I love the simplicity and the depth and the power that stories convey, whether it's, Star Wars or whether it's a biblical parable. And I was thinking of two parables in particular as these guiding principles in life. And so Jesus was quite a disruptive figure, back in the day, from what we read about him. He wasn't, mild-mannered. He said some things that really shook a lot of people and disrupted the status quo of the day. And, a certain group of people that he was constantly in conflict and had tension with were the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who were the religious authorities of the day. They were all very pious and learned and religious. And, probably a little bit hypocritical and judgmental as well from the stories that you read about them. And, you probably live next door to one of these people at some point in your life or another. And they didn't really trust him. They were quite suspicious of him. And, he didn't much like them all that deeply either. And one day he was outside teaching, and someone who was described as a teacher of the law. And some people interpret this as an attorney. I don't think he was an attorney. I think it was a religious scholar, like your priest would be, or a rabbi would be, or anyone who is within a religion or a theology that not only is quite learned themselves, but they're a teacher for other people. And they were kind of trying to trap him because they knew the law really well. So back in the Old Testament, the Hebrews were under 613 laws, and all of those laws had weight. It wasn't like, well, you know what? You need to follow all the laws, but, like law 236 to 253, well, those not really, but the other ones, no, they all held a lot of weight and a lot of significance. So this teacher says to him, so tell us, which is the highest law? Which is the most important law? And he comes back with this thing where he had said something to the effect of, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. That's a lot of love. And then he goes on to say, to thy neighbor, do the same. And I think the person's response to that was like, yes, you're correct in saying that. All the sacraments and all the behaviors and all the piety in the world does not matter if you don't love your God and if you don't exercise a level of love. And, I think the response to that was, it's been a long time since I've been at Sunday school. Yeah. So if that's what you're thinking, the kingdom of heaven is not far from you. So it was quite a powerful and meaningful exchange between, these two individuals. And then, but there's always this question that would come up in Bible study. Well, who's your neighbor? When you say to your neighbor, do the same, is that people that live next door to you? Or are we talking about people within your same postal code? Is there a certain, like meters or radius in which that includes neighbors? And in Luke, so that first story came from the book of Matthew. In Luke, Jesus describes this as well. I can't believe I'm talking about biblical stories here, but I think it is so powerful. So there's this story about a guy who lived in Jerusalem, and he was on his way to Jericho, and he encountered a band of hooligans. I think they were from St. Kilda, and
I remember running into him.
And they beat him quite severely. And they stripped off his clothing. They robbed him of just absolutely everything. And there was a priest, who was walking by a short time later and just kept going. Noticed the man, but just, not any of my business, kept going. A couple other people, passerbys, they just didn't stop, didn't even give him any consideration. And walking by within the same time frame is a Samaritan. So where the story of the Good Samaritan comes in. Now, the Samaritans, Samaria, these were foreigners, and people from Jerusalem and Israel and Samaria, they didn't really get on very well. They were kind of considered what we would frame as the quote unquote other. Now, this guy stops and he picks him up and he takes him to an inn, and he gives the innkeeper money and says, make sure this person is safe and is rested and is cleaned up and is fed, and I will pay all of the expenses. So who's your neighbor really? Your neighbor is also the other. It's not necessarily people who live where you live, think like you think, look how you look, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can add whatever you want to that. And if you go back to the book of Matthew, after, Jesus had said, love God with all of your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength, which is leaving out nothing. Basically, love with all of your being, and to your neighbor do the same. And your neighbor extends to absolutely everyone. He made a point to end with, this is the highest commandment. Not like it's highly recommended, not like, well, this is cool. But if you're doing all these other things, or if you're living a really righteous life and you're telling everyone about it, and you're pointing out where they're not living, there was no loopholes in this. Like, this is the single most important thing. And that's an example of a principle, because practices are important. They're critical. Behaviors can alter your thoughts. Behaviors can affect your emotional state. Behaviors can change the connections in your brain. But how do you know what behaviors to engage in order to get what you're looking for? And it's principles that guide those behaviors. And this is the same thing, with exercise or diet. If somebody tells you, well, do this exercise this way, or turn your arm this way, or move through this plane because you'll get this result. If the behavior, the practice, the action that they're talking about violates what you know about physiological principles, it doesn't make sense and it breaks down. Like somebody says, well, you want to get rid of that fat over your stomach. Well, you need to do more crunches, because crunches is going to, burn fat like butter in a microwave, or it's going to burn fat like it burns an Irishman on a beach day, or something like that. Well, you kind of got to step back and go, really? Well, how is fat burnt? So you got to know something about, let's say, the Krebs cycle, how energy is utilized in the body. And if spot reduction doesn't match with physiological print. Now, there's a lot of things about hormonal levels which determine where you're going to lose fat from. And, there's a lot of things like, well, what happens when you see, someone who's relatively skinny versus belly fat, not belly flat. Well, you could have belly flat. That's like the Instagram body, or belly fat, which is problematic because that's visceral fat and creates systemic inflammation and so on and so forth. But it's always principles that inform practices. And I was just thinking at Hannah's, what is the principle here? The principle is Hannah lived her life courageously because she lived her life lovingly. There was something worth being courageous for. There was something, even in the midst of cancer, if you would speak to her, have a conversation, or if you would even watch her journey through her Team Hannah videos, she was terrified. She was visibly terrified and shaken, as anyone would be. There was videos of her at the barber and having to get her head shaved because it was patchy from the chemo. And you could see the look on her face. She's not happy about it at all, but there was something through that beyond just the desire to live. She had a lot of love, and that was more important. And there was still, what was incredible about it is, in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about purpose being one of the most profound influencers behind whether or not someone would live or die. So when you went into a concentration camp, 27 out of every 28 people that went in died. And a lot of those people died immediately. They were just executed. And then the rest died in the labor camps. But what he observed, there's probably a lot of variables. It's never just one thing. But what he observed is that more than anything, a sense of purpose and meaning, either a sense of purpose within the camp, or there was a sense of purpose around what someone would do with their life once they got out of the camp. It was critical for survival. So just because you had a sense of purpose didn't mean that you were going to survive. A guard could single you out and just kill you just for fun. And it doesn't matter what sense of purpose you have, but without a sense of purpose, you are almost guaranteed to perish due to the psychological and physical torture and deprivation. And it was that purpose. And what was interesting is you would imagine that anybody that would be living in a situation that is hellish, it's hell on earth, no other way to describe something like that, would think, what more does life have to even offer me? Like, why would I even want to endure this another day? And then in the midst of them, there were people, and this isn't a judgment about strong or weak. I'm amazed by one, and I totally understand the other perspective, but in the midst of that environment, there were people that reconcile that even in the desperation and horror of their circumstances and unimaginable suffering, life was demanding a contribution from them. They were still accountable to contribute something. That is amazing. And that only comes from purpose. So even in the midst of sickness and the possibility of death, you could always tell that Hannah felt like life demanded a contribution, and she gave it. And I think that's the power of principles in informing and directing and helping us to persevere within the behaviors that are in direct alignment with the principles that serve as a compass for our entire life.
You remind me of one of the really early episodes I'd done with a guest called Josh Coleman. I'm not sure if you ever had him on.
Yeah, I did.
Amazing. I remember so vividly towards the end of a conversation saying to him, now for everyone listening, Josh, he's a leukemia survivor. He had leukemia and had an incredibly difficult life. He almost died several times. He had he went to a men's retreat and ended up getting wheeled away, having multiple heart attacks. He lives with host versus graft, or graft versus host disease, where your body's immune system attacks itself. But in the midst of that, flying to Australia for chemo, for this therapy, he sits next to a girl on the plane, and they get talking, and he said he's coming over to see his brother. And in the end, she mentions she's a cancer, a nurse, an oncology nurse. And so he tells her about this treatment, this unique treatment he's coming over for. And he's like in this moment of bravery. I'm like, do you want to come? Do you want to come and see it? And they're married now. And I remember towards the end of the conversation saying to him, and almost at the time I remember thinking, is a weird thing to say, but I said, I feel like your life is actually so much richer because of what you've been through. And he lives with it every day. He found faith. He found connection and had beautiful conversations with his father. He found the love of his life. And the thing is, when we sit back in our pretty comfortable lives with our trivial problems, I'm talking about myself here, like my trivial problems and challenges, and with my 100%, to the best of my knowledge, my 100% health and support and family and friends and all of the things. And we can look at or hear a story like Josh's and go, oh, the poor guy. And then I go, hang on, the poor guy, because he's been through and has this illness. Yet if we compare our lives and the things that matter, maybe his life is so much richer than, well, it is. It's so much richer than what I almost sit back and give it credit for, because we look at, again, all those superficial things. I didn't meet the partner of my dreams on an airplane. I didn't find deep-seated meaning and faith in, it's like the things that when people are faced with potential death, essentially, perspective around what really matters in the present moment means that you get present and you value it and you live it. You don't push it. You don't just know it and push it till tomorrow. Oh yeah, I know that, but I'm just a bit busy here doing this.
You know, there's a couple of things that show up for me. One, you probably don't fly enough. Second, there are certain environmental and psychological elements that lend themselves to resilience. I heard Tony Robbins talk about this on a podcast where it was like, well, you have two people that have something absolutely horrific and unimaginable happen to them. Unimaginable, excuse me. God, I can't seem to pronounce my words today. And one person completely falls apart and the other person thrives.
Yeah.
I hate comparisons like this because there are so many variables. And you think you understand what creates one outcome for someone versus another. And usually it's very simple and it's very heroic. It's one person's weak, the other one's strong. The other one has a good attitude. The other one's mindset and da-da-da-da-da. And it's bullshit, because when you really start to look into people and all of the variables that contribute to why people do what they do, it just doesn't hold up. So there's which person had a greater frequency or more horrible instances of adverse childhood experiences. That does not make you stronger. I hear people saying that all the time. The data does not support that at all. One of the greatest factors that determine whether or not a soldier who is in the same environment as other soldiers who are just as committed, just as patriotic, just as committed to one another, just as courageous. What's the difference between someone who comes home with PTSD and someone who doesn't? And adverse childhood experiences weigh heavily. So you can't go, well, it's either this or this. But I was listening to what he was saying, and from a psychological, maybe not a biological perspective, maybe not an environmental, but from a psychological perspective, where he was talking about desire and something that matters. And it goes back to Viktor Frankl's observation, and that does make sense. From a psychological perspective, it does. And there are certain things where there's this reason to keep going on. There's something that matters more than even the most horrific of circumstances. Because I was listening to Josh halfway through. I was like, for fuck's sakes. This is more, when he was getting into explicit detail of all of the treatments that had gone wrong, and where things that were supposed to, even if not go right, they weren't supposed to go that wrong. And then there was one and another and another and another and another. I'm sitting there going, no human being should have to endure that. And then him talking about how grateful he is because of what he has.
Yeah.
At the end of that, it's more than just gratitude. That gratitude is a consequence of something. There is that, I was about to say compass, or kind of like at The Great Gatsby, the green light on Daisy's dock. But no, he just lost his mind and wound up getting shot at the end of the book. So yeah, okay, that's a horrible example. Maybe the green light is not very good, but there's definitely something there that's more than just attitudinal. It's deeply spiritual. When I say spiritual, I don't mean religious. I'm not talking about that. When I say spiritual, I'm talking about understanding on a psychological, emotional, and deep visceral level what it is that gives your life meaning. So my last with Dr. Avi, this guy's brilliant, and we talked about Ikigai. And then I listened to Paul Taylor's podcast, and I discovered that we got Ikigai a little bit wrong, but that's a different story. But Ikigai is what you find value in, what gives you bliss, what gives you joy, what's your purpose. Because when you engage in that and you share that and you express that, you will have a positive influence on others. Not everyone, but others.
Yeah.
And that's it. All right. I guess we wrap up here then. I'm going to do it. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to wrap up right now. You dare me? I'm going to wrap up. Half the listeners are going, no, we want to hear. The other half will go, thank heavens. I was hoping he would shut up at some point. He just went off on one.
See, I just was so mesmerized that I was just sitting back in the conversational armchair, soaking it in. I like it when you just riff.
Well, it's because I think these are one of the hours where, like, what's on my mind for the entire week. This is a very fluid type of, like, we clearly do not have I remember, like, being a guest on people's podcasts, and some people are like, oh, just show up and we're just going to have a conversation. Other people are like, okay, I would like an outline for each question. Here are the 7 questions I'm going to ask you. And I would like 3 to 5 bullet points of exactly what you're going to talk about. And if you could, like, kind of like give me a time frame, is this going to take 3 to 5 minutes? Because I'm just like, first of all, no, I'm sorry. This is way too much. Second, this conversation is going to be completely contrived. Oh. This is almost like you're prompting me to do a series of adverts. It's not a fluid discussion. Here, we do have a plan. Like, earlier on the week, all right, we're going to come on, we're going to talk about this. And I think our listeners know that, because you'll usually quite cheekily go, hey, that would be a great segue to talk about, the nutritional value of oranges. It's like, all I said was, hey, how's it going, Tiff? I don't see the segue there. But so everyone's going, they planned this. But we don't plan much more around that, because we want to have an authentic conversation around something and just share our ideas as they're flowing out of us without having the chance to stop and edit over and over and over. And I was just thinking, in this poignant moment, I think there's few moments in life that are as poignant as when you're attending a funeral. You really get a glimpse into what matters, not what we chase, not what we get distracted by, not what we tell one another matters, but what absolutely matters. When you're on your deathbed, are you going to be worried about what people are doing, or what they're wearing, or how they're living, and who you're upset? Nope. You're going to be worried about the same stuff they talk about at funerals. And in that funeral, the thing that I was thinking is, what's the message here? And the message for me came down to love. If you love people, you're not going to get things right all the time, but you can course correct rather quickly. So, another loss, Tina Turner. Tina Turner hit me hard. I mean, not so hard, because she was 83 and she was an outright icon. But where I identified with her deeply is, I know what it's like to be trapped in an environment where you are completely used and controlled. You are a vehicle. You are not a human being. And you are enduring every minute, not every day, but every minute, some form of severe physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional abuse. Angela Bassett did a masterful job in that role as Tina Turner. And then watching her documentary, you can't help love this woman. And she went through all of that, ended up with absolutely nothing, in a spontaneous and courageous run for her freedom. Like, it details how she ran across the road, this busy road, to get to a motel. And then when she got there, this is in her document, she had no money. And if she couldn't get into that hotel, Ike would have killed her or made her wish she was dead. And she had no money. She realized it. And she's pleading with this person. Listen, my name, I'm Tina Turner. And I know who you are. I know who you are. And gave her a room. If that would have been somebody else who was miserable and vindictive in their own life, the Tina Turner story could have went very differently. That was a pivotal moment. I mean, think about that. Think about what kindness costs you versus what it can do for somebody else. Just that, like, okay, I know who you are. I know you're good for this money. Like, I don't need to see an ID, because some people, like, they know who you are.
But what if that was someone else and you don't know them? Like, I wonder what would play out.
I don't know what would have happened, because maybe you would have someone who was afraid. Like, I don't know you. I could lose my job. I could get fired. So many things could happen to someone in that desperate situation. But in this case, it was Tina Turner. She was recognized. She did get let into that hotel or motel. And if she didn't, it would have been brutal. I know, because I've been in those situations. I've been hiding in closets where, okay, if this person opens up this closet door at this point, I'm going to require a hospital. And how terrified you are. So I can relate to those moments. And then she goes through a very steep uphill journey, but becomes Tina Turner. Like, she's an icon and she's free. And that is, and like, is married to this person who absolutely adores her, where it's like, how could you not adore Tina Turner? And
even for a woman to choose to be so visible after stepping out of a situation like that is bravery. Like, I know women who have had to step out of things and being too visible, even just in business. Like, they have to play themselves down in how they appear in business, because there is this person in the world that will always be there, that once had a hold over them, that still exists in the world. Imagine, good on her for stepping up and not fearing who she could become in the world, and to become so big and so known.
Outright champion. Courageous, valiant, generous. And to help her cope, she got into Buddhism. And, I make an attempt, to stay off of posts, but I was reading the comments, because so many of them were so beautiful. And I was just like, I just want to read these comments and just share a little bit in what this person meant to so many people, because the arts does touch us deeply. Like, you hear a song, you see a performance, and it connects us all to the human experience, because we've all experienced pretty much the same things in maybe a different context. But there was a string of comments about, well, she'll never go to heaven. She's practicing Buddhism. She doesn't get to go. She's in hell. And I'm just like, at first I got really angry. Like, wow, that's when you look at this woman's life, that's what you feel is so important that you absolutely need to say. And then I was like, wow, I feel horrible. These people must be in so much pain and misery. They're so far from their center. They're so off course, because these people were coming from a religious perspective. So if you believe in God, however God shows up for you, how many different religions there are. In this case, your God is Christ, because you're professing to be a Christian. And, you say things like, nothing is more important than God. Nothing is bigger, more powerful than God. Yeah, because, you believe in a Christian God, not like the God of Marvel Comics, where, I don't know, could be the one above all, could be the Beyonders. I don't know, maybe could be the Molecule Man at some point. Nope, this is the highest in the universe, or multiverse, omniverse, whatever verse you want to encapsulate in this. And the highest authority in the universe is saying this is the highest commandment. in the universe, love for your neighbor, which encompasses who? Well, pretty clear. It's everybody. It's not only everybody, it's even, and in some cases, probably especially the person you consider the other. And you're supposed to love that. So when you're making that comment, are you making that comment because you never met this person, but you love her with all of your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength? Is that how much love is driving you to comment? Nope. That's contempt. That's moral superiority. No matter what she did, no matter what she persevered through, no matter how much pain she suffered, no matter how much joy she brought people, and no matter how much she accomplished, she's suffering and I won't, because I am better than her. I think if you're aiming for love, you miss the target altogether. I don't even think you hit the trees off to the side of it. It's like, what does that? Because we all have these moments where we feel pretty bitter and we have these horrible thoughts. What is your compass? What's the principle that guides your behaviors, or at least, kind of like executing a proper squat, whatever conversation we would have about that. You can't talk about what ideal movement looks like until you first understand what a deviation from quote unquote proper form looks like.
Yeah.
That's what principles do for you. That's like so many people, they're going through their practices, but man, you got to question, what's the principle that's driving that? And for me, that compass, for Hannah, I hope, if I become the type of person Hannah was, which, got to be honest, I'm not there. Not there yet. But
I think you're there.
I'll try to be. Well, you just don't know Hannah. You just didn't know her. Don't you tell me I'm there.
Well, I think you're amazing.
Hannah, well, thank you. And I thought Hannah was amazing. I still think she is amazing. But what was I even talking about? Yeah. So whether it's me, Hannah, Tina, whatever, I'm not comparing myself to Tina, definitely. Just I wish I had her stage presence, but no matter who you're talking about, when you see somebody, or Josh, you're seeing someone that has a compass that when everything goes wrong, no matter how deep they get into their emotional despair, their anger, their bitterness, it at some point gives them the direction to have a much better chance of setting things right.
And the beauty of us being able to hear and speak to and understand those people's stories and perspectives and have these conversations about them, like they get to experience what gives them a new perspective and a new way of being. And because of empathy and our connection with stories, we get to lend that and we have something to aspire to. I love speaking about and I love hearing about Hannah, because I go, oh, what a special person. What a great reminder. How do I live? How do I love? How do I want people to talk about me? Super special. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Big love, Bobby. Hey.
I love you, Tiffany Cook.
I love you, Bobby Capuccio.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us for another episode of Roll with the Punches and the Self-Help Attitude. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.